All right, Doc, I got to tell you, and I'm going back a little bit. Conor McGregor. I feel as even though this is past news. Listen, he's got a compound fracture. Please correct me if I'm wrong. He came out after the fact. He said he had stress fractures going into the fight. I don't fully know what a stress fracture is. And then after that, Dana said that he deals with some arthritis. So as it pertains to Conor and the ankle, tell me what all of this means together.
Okay, so let's back up. So the term compound, so that would note that it's an open fracture. So that's an old phrase that we don't really use anymore. So that would be an incorrect way. So a compound fracture would be if his bone came out of the skin. That's something that happened to Chris Weidman, but not in Conor's case, thankfully. Those are a little bit more concerning because they're higher incidence of an infection because the bone is coming out. It can get contaminated with the bacteria and such on the outside of the skin. But so we would call this a tibia and fibula fracture, not a compound fracture. And then going back to that point about the stress fracture. So I know Conor had released this information that he had stress fractures of the tibia, released some images which appeared to be more ankle based. And then, I think Dana White was on an interview, and Dana White, maybe in defense, because people had said, why is the UFC allowing him to compete with these injuries? I think possibly in defense, and I'll ask your opinion on that too, why Dana White would have made those statements public. But he said that Conor has ankle arthritis. So if that's the case, if Conor does in fact have ankle arthritis, that would have nothing to do with any injury that he sustained at UFC 264. It would be completely separate. It would not predispose to that injury at all. Now, if he did have stress reaction or stress fractures of the tibia, that would be a different story.
Okay, and Doc, I don't know a ton about this. I mean, I know three guys in my whole life, including on TV, three guys I've ever seen, Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva, and now Conor McGregor, that have similar injuries like this. But everything that I hear and everything I read, it's about 6 months to come back. I want to know, how accurate is that? I mean, even if in 6 months a doctor says you can come back, does that mean to competition, there must be some physical therapy you have to go through? There must be a number of months, even once you're cleared, just to strengthen that. Am I right?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think any of those guys really got back to a UFC, competition in terms of, the competition in 6 months. I think more doable would be something like 12 months. The average, rehab after this, or the average process or recovery, you have the operation. Hopefully it's a straightforward surgery. We know in Conor's case, he had a rod placed down the tibia and he had fibular plates and screws. So the advantage to placing a nail on the inside of the tibia is it's immediately stabilized. So we typically, as long as the surgery goes well and we're able to get those fracture ends lined up nicely, we'll allow him to start putting weight on it immediately. I know I've seen on his social media, Conor's released some pictures. He's already seems to be standing on it, thankfully. But that's where the physical therapy really starts to get involved, start walking on it, and then start progressing to things like biking and pivoting type movements. And we saw, recently Chris Weidman, who just went through this, I think he had posted stuff where he's boxing and doing drills like that. So I think more realistically, probably somewhere close to 12 months if there's no, unforeseen complications like infections or blood clots and things like that, which hopefully there will not be.
Okay, so let me fast forward you to more recently. TJ Dillashaw, just a couple of nights ago, he gets a cut. The cut was pretty bad. By fight standards, it's kind of hard to judge from my living room, but it looked kind of like other cuts where I've seen a fight stop, in addition to the fact his fight with Sandhagen was postponed 6 weeks. It was supposed to happen a month and a half ago, but he took a cut in training. I spoke with TJ's coach, Daryl Christian, this morning. He said it was the exact same spot. And so what is that about cuts? I mean, I know that they seem to open up a little bit easier when you have scar tissue as opposed to skin.
That's a great point. And I made a post about this. I honestly think the location and severity of that cut, I think it was 50-50 if that fight would have been stopped. And I think a lot of it comes down to which ringside position is there and the comfort level. If you really know the fight game, I think a lot of guys will get a little bit more latitude. If you're a Nate Diaz or something and you're battling these cuts, we know how tough a Nate Diaz is, for example. But TJ Dillashaw, what he had going against him is the location was on the inner brow, which we call the glabellar lesion, or glabellar region. And we know those cuts, the bad thing about those, they run down and they get into the eye, so they can start to affect vision. The other thing that was bad about that cut was it was extending very dangerously close to the eye socket itself. So I think you could not have been criticized if you're the ringside doc and you stopped that fight. But I think a lot of it comes down to the comfort level of ringside docs. What people don't understand is we come in all different specialties. You could have a primary care doctor. I'm, for example, an orthopedic surgeon. So I'm very comfortable with big open wounds. I make incision and I'm staring at bone and soft tissues all day. So for me, a cut maybe is not a big deal. But if you have another doctor that maybe is not a surgeon or not comfortable with incisions or lacerations, maybe they don't feel as comfortable. But it's definitely a risk. And this is definitely a sport where there's going to be risk for injury for sure.
And what is the likelihood of that reopening? I mean, is there some truth to what I said about scar tissue? I'm repeating what I've heard other people, but I've been told that if you have some scar tissue, the bleeding can open up more. I'm told by Daryl, TJ's coach, that every time he gets headbutt in practice and he refuses to wear headgear, that same spot opens up.
Right.
Is there any way to strengthen that?
It's tough. It's really tough, because what happens is when you start to develop scar tissue of the skin, it's never the same strength or integrity as the normal skin. The other thing, especially in that region above the eye sockets, is with someone who's been punched for years and years and jabs, in practice and stuff. What you'll notice is guys' heads you'll start to develop increase of bone. I don't know if you ever noticed any of that. Guys start to develop an increase of bone over that region. And so that can actually cause an increased likelihood of continuing cuts because it's not as smooth and you have that scarred bone below that when you're punching that skin, it's banging up against that bone. And that can be, some guys will actually have surgery to get that reduced or smoothened out.
And Doc, interesting you say that. That's one part I left out. When I was talking to Coach Dale Christian this morning, he told me that a doctor of TJ's wanted to go in and sand that down because he said that extra bone is going to cut open all the time.
Right. So it's basically like you have something sharp underneath the skin. And when if you get jabbed or you get hit in that location, underneath is something very sharp. It's going to have an increased likelihood of opening back up, especially when you add on top of that, you have skin that doesn't have the same integrity with that scar tissue.
All right, Doc, now let me ask you something on a personal note, and I'm going to put this out, but personally, just that I want to ask you, vaccines, I am all for them. I rushed out to get mine. Am I missing something? Should people be getting vaccinated?
Absolutely, yes. And, and I'll be honest, I'm a doctor myself. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, but, there's definitely more doctors that are more versed than myself in vaccine. And so when I'm not sure, I call a friend, right? So I have very smart friends who are in the emergency room, and I ask them, I'm like, guys, politics aside, what's going on with these vaccines? Is it a good idea? And they said, absolutely, yes. They work the emergency room, so they're seeing the scary cases. They're working in the ICUs. They're seeing the scary cases. They said, this is not something that you want to get. And what we know about people that do get vaccinated is if you do, in fact, get the disease or get the virus, you have a less likelihood of having severe symptoms. You have a less likelihood of being hospitalized in the ICU and less likelihood of very serious complications, including death. So I highly recommend getting vaccines. And from all the data that we've had so far, they seem to be helping to stop very severe reactions to the virus.
Yes, Doc, I fully agree. I appreciate your opinion, of course. I would tell you why I asked that question is a lot of people are speaking out against vaccines, including people in this space. And I will tell you, I don't have the courage to do it. It seems like that's a very risky game that time is going to tell. But if you are on the side of encouraging somebody to not get vaccinated and time goes by and says that we lost lives, that's going to be a lot to live with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. I appreciate you very much. Anything you want to ask me?
Let's see here.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was just, I asked you if you, I didn't know if you wanted to, before we go.
And I want to go back to these conspiracy theory guys that say,
sure.
Dana, remember how Conor McGregor, he released that footage that he said, Dana White and Dr. Davidson and the UFC, they knew that I had these stress fractures in the tibia. So let's put it, so does the UFC, do they make guys fight when they're injured?
No, absolutely not. And it's interesting that you bring that up because when Conor told that, I was trying to interpret Conor's point, of which obviously this was part of the excuse making in the PR, trying to explain why this happened. But I was trying to interpret that too. He never came out and said it, but was he trying to hint that he was hurt and never should have been in there? As a matter of fact, the commission was even had this information. When he brought Dr. Davidson in, I wasn't quite sure what Conor's point was. I'll answer your question directly, which is absolutely not. You have the right to disclose that. Not only do you have the right to disclose that, you sign under penalty of perjury, not only to promise to answer every question the commission thought of. There is then a very blank and general question. It is the last question that you are asked, which is, do you have any ailment that is yet to be disclosed to us? And that you literally write it in and you sign the bottom. Your license could be revoked. It could demand a hearing if you lied on that form. Absolutely not. To your question, would the UFC ever let you, allow you, or encourage you? The show must go on. That is not true in this business.
The other thing that I'll respond back to people that make that point is, if you really think about it, doesn't the UFC do better when Conor's winning? Doesn't the UFC do better when Conor's at his full peak? Wouldn't you think, okay, we got our star is injured. Let's give him another month. Let's give him another 2 months. We want Conor at his maximum potential, because if Conor, that's his best chance to win. And when Conor is winning, that's better. I think it's better for the UFC.
I fully agree with you. And just to further that thought, just to tell the whole story in case anybody's tuning in late doesn't know what we're talking about, Dana was very candid when Dana was asked about that publicly. He said, yes, I did know Conor's ankles bothered him. As a matter of fact, he petitioned to the commission to be able to wrap his ankles. He ended up choosing not to. But everything seemed very above board to me. And I don't even think that Conor quite made the accusation. He kind of floated an idea out there, and I think he kind of ran it back. He's never said anything since that, but I do think it's important that people like you and I come out and we say, no, man, nobody was forced out there that was injured, or even encouraged that was injured. You fill out the forms, they take you at your word, and you move on.
Right. And to that point, if he was dealing with something, which I'm sure that he was, show me a guy going into a fight that's not dealing with a little bit of something. Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure, including
Absolutely.
Dustin. Look, I've been in that spot. We make excuses. I think that's what it was. Doc, I appreciate you. I appreciate the time. Let's do this again. I love your insight, pal.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.